12 Faces of Sober Speaks podcast, episode 54. Ladies and gentlemen, here goes another good show. Let me tell you, I got my brother now, Martin. He has a damn good story. I'm not even going to front. He has a damn good story. Just the information that he has shared with me and the information that I found by going on his page. You guys won't be at all upset with the information that he's going to share with you today. But before we get into that, everything 12 Faces of Sober, you can follow me on Instagram, 12 Faces of Sober. That's the number 12 Faces of Sober, as well as you can shop the merchandise on 12facesofsober.com. While you're on there, you can get a signed copy or order a signed copy of 12 Faces of Sober. My book hit bestseller for, I would say, about 3 or 4 days on Amazon back February 22nd, so during Black History Month. So thank you for those who show the support. I just added some new slides, multiple colors on my website, as well as I added a new addition to some workout, some tank tops for women as far as gym attire, and multiple colors of tank tops for men. Like I said, you guys will be looking really nice with that 12 Faces Sober gear, as well as you can get the book on Amazon. All you have to do is type in 12 Faces of Sober, and you'll be able to get without getting having a signed copy. Also, be on the lookout for my children's book. That one's about my baseball career playing in California as a child. I felt like, it was that inner child in me wanted to come out and share my story of, how good I was playing baseball. But due to some discrimination in California, in the area, my baseball career was cut short at 14. So be on the lookout for that. That's actually at the editor right now. Hopefully I'll be able to get that up on my birthday in August. I'm just waiting on the pictures from a buddy of mine in San Diego. And hopefully, like I said, I'll be able to get that before this week is over. So without further ado, Martin, I just met him literally probably about 3 or 4 days ago. He had an interesting way of finding me. He said that he did a search, and I thought he did a search on YouTube. So I Google searched myself on YouTube. And but he did an actual Google search, and he typed in top podcast, and he said that I was in between between the top 50 and 70, which is still good for me, for someone who only has about 50, like I said, 54 episodes. So that's an awesome feeling to know that, hey, you can Google search 12 Faces of Sober. And like I said, we had a brief conversation in terms of his story. Without me giving out the information, let me tell you, I was floored, only because, for one, I'm a total stranger. And for him to share that information, I was definitely honored that he shared it. And of course, when he said, hey, I would love to share my story in your podcast, I immediately responded, was like, yeah, I'm game. And so, like I said, he's here today. Look forward to hearing his story. And like I said, Martin, welcome to 12 Faces Sober Speaks podcast.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. It's truly an honor to be here, and I got great admiration and respect for what you do and the messages you get out to the masses, and making the community safer. Thank you so much.
All right, now let's start by just where are you from? Where were you raised, and then we'll go right on into the interview.
Sure. So I grew up in Northeast Portland in the 80s, and for anybody who knows anything about that area, it was bad. It was crime infested. It was, gangs fighting for territory and drive-by shootings, prostitution, name it. It was going on in Northeast Portland. It's since been, gentrified like a lot of areas throughout the country, but those were some pretty rough days. I grew up with both parents in the household. I have a twin brother and 2 older sisters. My dad worked to support the family. Mom stayed at home to take care of us kids. My dad was a very blue collar, no nonsense, hardworking guy. In fact, he had my brother and I in Little League and wrestling and Pop Warner football and Cub Scouts, pretty much any activities outside of school, I think mainly to keep us from the negative influences in our environment. And so that worked well for the most part until I got into high school, when things drastically changed for me at that point.
Okay. And so now during that time, because you telling that story sounds familiar to me. Like I said, I grew up in the 80s as well. And so I know what you're talking about. It's very surprising to hear that Oregon gets it in. You know what I'm saying? Like I mean, like, to be honest. But like I said, as we were, talking offline, I was just up there. So I saw some stuff, and I was very surprised to even see what I saw. And so I guess to me is that, being that you were keeping yourself busy, playing sports and everything, when did you get a chance to, or did you, like, as a teen or even as an adolescent, did you get out there and start experimenting with drugs and alcohol?
Right. So again, so between that eighth grade and ninth grade school year, a lot changed for me. So a friend of mine had come to live with us, and he was a notorious gang member. All the guys feared him, all the women loved him, and he was a total opposite of what I was, even though he was only a year older. And so I'm 14, he's 15, but yet he's I see him as a god, right? And so I wanted to mimic him. I wanted to emulate him. So I traded in all my, turtlenecks and corduroy pants for Dickies, and I'm sagging and wearing Chuck Taylors and trying to be a little gang member, even though I wasn't raised that way. That was, the furthest thing from me. But we started to hang out with him, my twin brother and me. We would go to parties and things like that. And I remember we were at a party, and he comes over and he hands my brother and me a beer. And we're both looking at each other like, what are we supposed to do with this? Like, mom and dad would kill us if
Right.
we drink this, right? But at the same time, like, we're amongst all these, popular people, and it's like, I'm not about to not drink. So I cracked that beer, man, and I took those first few swigs, and it heated me up. And man, I'll tell you, all the shyness just swept away. I was able to freely talk to girls and just laugh and joke and have a good time. And I'm like, so this is what it's like to not be shy and be timid. This is what it's like to just be loose and go with the flow. So at that point, it was like, not every day from that point, but it was pretty much on a routine basis that we would, go steal some Mad Dog 2020, some Night Train, Thunderbird from the store, drink after school in the park. And for the next couple of years, that's pretty much what we did. And then it certainly escalated from there.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds, it seems to be a thing too, because that happened to me as well. Like, I first time I took a drink, I recall it was at least about 4 or 5 years old. But I had my dad was in the military, so when he traveled, when he was in the Navy, he would come back with all that exotic liquor from the Philippines, Japan, and stuff like that. So he would leave it there as a novelty. And myself and my sister, or one of my sisters, we go in there and hit the little wall unit and take a little sip of some of the nastiest alcohol. But it was like, the experiment. And so I truly understand. But yeah, the same way in high school, it picked up too, especially like I said in San Diego. It was like, we would ditch school and smoking weed out of aluminum foil pipes. And like you said, you even gave me a stomach ache, because I remember the last time I got drunk off of Mad Dog 2020. And yeah, so matter of fact, the last time I truly drank Mad Dog 2020 was 2005 in Tacoma, Washington. I had my buddy, one of my best friends, he lives out in Bremerton. And he was getting married, and I went to 7-Eleven, mixed some Mad Dog 2020 with a Slurpee and stuff. So yeah, you bringing back some of them painful alcohol memories. Now,
very painful. Yeah, I remember
now,
them vividly.
Now we're you're out of high school now, or even during high school. Did it ever become a problem during that time, or did it more or less like pick up as now you're becoming an adult? And you're getting a little bit more freedom, or things like that?
Right. So it started off, like I said, as just a social lubricant. But I'll say around 16 or so, it took a different turn because now at this point, Kenneth, I'm starting to manifest some pretty deep-seated insecurities in my life. I'll say going back to when I was in Cub Scouts and things like that, it was in a predominantly white neighborhood. So I'm looking at, a middle-class neighborhood, manicured lawns, clean streets, houses are, newer. And, juxtapose that with me driving back to the hood 15 minutes, the other direction, and it's the opposite, right? And so in my little 10, 11-year-old brain, I'm thinking, well, is this the way all Black people live? And do all white people live this way? And what's wrong with me that me and mine have to live this way and they get to live this other way?
Right.
And so that just kind of started to, it formed a pretty negative self-concept within me, right? So now I'm 16 years old. I'm starting to look at adulthood and thinking, well, what are my prospects in life? If everybody around me I see that looks like me is living this way, then what does that say about my life, right? What does that mean for me? I love my dad to death, but he's struggling and working 10 hours a day just to, bring home the bare minimum to take care of the family, right? And so feeling insecure, having struggling with my identity, some depression in there, just feeling overall inadequate. So now I'm drinking in isolation to numb those painful feelings, right? I would literally lock myself in my room, turn on some sad, Casey and JoJo or something, and just drink because I just wallowed in self-pity. And so that was when the alcoholism, I would say, really, really took root. And that persisted until 19 years old. I ended up going to prison for 3.5 years. My buddies and I committed an armed robbery and we were caught, and they have mandatory minimum laws in the state of Oregon. So now I didn't physically go in, not that it matters. I was the mastermind. So I did the blueprint of the layout. It was a place I used to work at, things like that. And they went in there, physically robbed it. We all went down the same way. I ended up getting a 5.5-year sentence at the age of 19. My family was devastated, as you can imagine, but they stuck by my side. They encouraged me to get my GED at that time, turn over a new leaf. I wanted to make them proud. So of course I graduated, or got my GED at that point. I returned to my Christian roots. We had grown up in the church. I graduated valedictorian of a boot camp program that actually allowed me to release early after serving about 3.5 years.
Okay. So
then I returned home to my parents' house at the age of 22, and things are going very well until they didn't.
Now, you mentioned that. So let's go right into it. Now, what was it like, let's say the day of the incident? Now I'm familiar with it, but let's just go ahead and talk about it.
Okay. So just to kind of set the stage a little bit, I'll say for my first 6 months, when I got out at the age of 22, I was doing well. I was going to school, I was working a job, life was going well. But I tricked myself into thinking that because I have all these things going on in my life as well, I'm taking community college courses, I'm holding down a job, I'm paying, my bills, everything is looking good on the outside, then I can dabble a little bit with alcohol again, right? And so my addicted brain deceived me into thinking that I could manage it. But that's never the way that alcohol works if you're an alcoholic. Right. And so I started to drink and I started to drive, and I did this recklessly for 19 months straight, leading up to the day of the fatal crash. Okay. So just to kind of paint that picture, I woke up at 6:30 in the morning. I drove to my job at a warehouse in Portland. I lived in Vancouver, Washington at the time, about a half hour from Portland. I had gotten off work early because of the holiday. And as we're wrapping up and about ready to clock out, I can still hear my boss joke with us and say, you guys go out and have a good time tonight, but don't let me wake up and see you on the front page. Of course, I laughed it off, didn't think anything of it, clocked out, headed straight to the liquor store. I bought a fifth of gin.
Mm.
I then proceeded to my parents' house to hang out with my twin brother. That's where he was living at the time. I get to my parents' house, we're hanging out. I drink the alcohol. He cut my hair. We made plans for later that night to attend a friend's house party, a guy we had gone to high school with. Now, after I drank that fifth of gin, I then went back to the store where I bought 4 24-ounce cans of beer that I consumed over the next 3 or 4 hours. Now, if you're doing the quick math on that, that's 96 ounces of beer that I drank by myself on top of the fifth of gin.
Mm.
So my brother and I, about 8:30 that night, we decided we would go to another friend's house to hang out. In the meantime, we didn't want to get to the party too early. So we get to that friend's house. The three of us drink a pint of Hennessy together. We hang out, kill some time. About 11:30 or so, we exit his apartment to go to the party. And as we're walking out the door, Kenneth, distinctly like it was yesterday, his mom said, "Now, y'all be careful tonight. You hear?"
Mm.
So all three of us said, "Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am." We had no intentions of being careful that night. Let's be clear.
Mm-hmm.
So we get to the party, have fun, see a bunch of old classmates, drink some more, bring in the new year. Everything is great. About 12:15, we exit the party. We get in my vehicle. Now, none of us ever thought twice about, hey man, maybe you shouldn't drive tonight. Hey, let me drive. We had all been drinking. And if I'm being honest with you, this is something that all three of us did on a daily basis. It was nothing to have drank all day and to drive all night.
Mm-hmm.
As sad as that is to say.
Right.
I take my friend home without incident. I get back onto the freeway to take my brother home. At this point, all I'm thinking is how exhausted I am because I've been drinking all day. I think I had one meal from Popeyes at about 4:30.
Mm.
And so I'm just exhausted. And I want to get him home. So on the freeway, I begin to pick up my speed to about 80 miles an hour. And this makes my brother nervous. He's like, hey, man, you should slow down. The police are out, it being a holiday and all. I'm thinking, just calm down, man. I got this. But to keep him quiet, I went ahead and slowed down. So we continue to drive on the freeway for about 10 minutes. And I take the exit. We're driving in a residential area. I'm about to drop him off. He suddenly realizes he's all out of cigarettes. So he says, hey, let's go up to the mini mart up the road so I can get some cigarettes. I'm all out. I'm thinking, man, here is one more stop that I don't want to have to make.
Mm.
So we continue to drive for 2 blocks. And then about 2 blocks from that point, there's an intersection and the mini mart is just beyond the intersection.
Mm.
And I'm looking up at the light and the light is as plain as day, it is yellow. And I knew I was not going to make this light. But it didn't matter because in a split second, I had made up my mind. I'm going right through. I'm not waiting. So I immediately punched the gas and I'm in a newer model Acura. So I pick up speed fast, just literally boom. I mean, just like that. Now, at the time, I knew I had hit somebody, but as intoxicated as I was and just out of it as I was, I didn't think to go check on the people I had just hit.
Mm.
I step out of my vehicle and my first instinct was to check on my custom rims because I'm so superficial. This is my baby. It's my prized possession. So I'm looking at my rims and I'm looking at my total car. And my brother's like, hey, man, he points across the street. He's like, hey, I think I see somebody lying down on the pavement and it doesn't look like they're moving.
Mm.
At that point, it dawns on me the magnitude of what I had just done. But as soon as I started to try to process it, as you can imagine, lights and sirens were everywhere around us.
Mm.
So the policemen are on the scene and they're talking to me and they take my brother a few feet away to talk to him. And the officer confirms to me about 3 minutes into that interview what I had already in my heart had known to be true, which was that person who was lying on the pavement had in fact perished.
Okay.
And he informed me that another was being driven by ambulance to the hospital just blocks away. So I'm placed under arrest, put into the back of the cruiser we had for downtown for processing. And as we're going downtown, now I know in my mind, the Oregon law requires DUI manslaughter, mandatory 120 months day for day, not a day off for good time, work time, education, nothing.
Mm.
So I'm processing the fact that I just killed someone, but also at 24 years old, I know I'm not coming home for the next 10 years.
Mm.
I'm listening to the police radio and there's a lot of chatter, as you can imagine, about the crash. And I hear it come over the radio, what I think sounded like another person, unbeknownst to me, had been pronounced dead at the scene. So I asked the officer, I said, excuse me, sir, I said, did I just hear right that somebody else was in the vehicle that died at the scene? He said, unfortunately, yes.
Mm.
You just can't imagine the devastation that swept over me. And so that was my New Year's Eve of 2003.
Damn, that's deep, man. I'm gonna tell you, I appreciate you sharing that, and the reason why I say that is because of the numerous times that I got behind the wheel. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah,
and and it could have been it could have been me and not you driving. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
And that's why, when you said you wanted to be on the podcast, this is the reason why.
yes,
And
sir.
I want to just touch on something real quick because I did do a night in jail in 2008, and I mean I don't let's just say that there was some stuff that happened that, well, I mean, it's not, I mean, I did 16 hours for criminal damage, but there was some markings on my car. To this day, I still don't know where it came from.
Mm,
You know what I'm saying? And
yeah,
that's the part where it's like, so be honest with you, man, this is probably by far one of the realest interviews because this is home in so many ways. And so that's why I couldn't put it off. I had to have you on because I feel like that, as people in this recovery community, they need to hear stuff like this. And to be honest, it is scare them straight. You know what I'm saying?
absolutely.
And
No, you're right. You're right. And I'll tell you, Kenneth, you know, I can't tell you how many times I had seen the news. I had read newspaper articles where this same thing had happened to so many people before me, right? But yet, in my tangled web of self-deceit, irrationality, excuse making, I had actually managed to convince myself that would never happen to me,
right.
right? That everybody else who had done this before me were simply lightweight drinkers
Hmm.
who couldn't contain their alcohol,
Hmm.
right? But I was smarter than that,
Right.
right? I was better than that. And I'm telling you as plain as day, you never think it's gonna happen to you
Right.
until it does.
But it does.
Yeah.
That's real. Now, now you're you going through the process, and you know walk me through in terms of, like, when everything was handed down, in terms of knowing that, okay, you about to do a little bit of time behind walls, and how did your family take that? You know what I'm saying? Because I know you had said that they were supportive of you, from the prior incident. So how was that?
Sure. So let me say, I called my family the next morning, and as you can imagine, they were in utter disbelief,
Mm.
right? Because I'll tell you, they didn't know the extent of my drinking during that 2 years that I was out and I was doing well and going to school and working, right? They had no idea that it had gotten that bad because I hid that from them, of
Right.
course. So they were shocked. My dad blamed my brother, he blamed my friend for allowing me to drive. It was nobody's fault but mine, right? But they just couldn't believe what had happened, and so they were very, very shaken up by this. My twin brother, who was in the car that night, was extremely distraught.
Mm.
But it was 3 days later that I'm in my cell and I'm just minding my own business, and I noticed someone had slid the Oregonian newspaper, the statewide newspaper, underneath my door, and I thought, that's strange, I didn't ask somebody to see a paper.
Mm.
So I pick up the paper, I begin to thumb through it, I see my picture on the front page of the Metro section, and with each paragraph that I read that day, for the first time in days, my faceless victims became people.
Mm.
And these people had a story.
Mm.
And their story was they were recovering addicts who had actually turned their lives around and were now helping others get clean and sober. They would watch women so they could go to AA and NA meetings, right? They volunteered with Volunteers of America. They worked with the MAD organization, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They were coming home from a clean and sober New Year's Eve party that night.
Wow.
when they were struck and killed by a drunk driver.
Mm.
And so the columnist had talked about how ironic that was, that they had done all this work in the recovery community only to be killed by a drunk driver, the very person they would have done anything to help.
Right.
And so he concluded the article with the statement, I'll never forget, it changed my life forever. He said, quote, perhaps the person they will have ended up helping the most is the man who's charged with killing them, end quote. Now,
that's deep. That's
tell
deep.
me about it. No,
That's
tell me
deep.
about it.
That's real talk. That's deep. Yeah.
Right. So I'm 24 years old. I know I'm looking at about 20 years in prison. So I couldn't fully appreciate the value in what he had just said, but like it was so profound, I had to figure out what those words were supposed to mean for my life.
Mm.
So for the next several months, man, I prayed about it.
Mm.
I meditated on that phrase, hearing it over and over and over in my head. And then about 7 or 8 months later, it came to me as I'm still, in the county jail awaiting trial, that the only way this tragedy will not simply be in vain is if I carry on their legacies, right? If I somehow make it my life's mission to do everything and anything I possibly can to prevent somebody else from making the same catastrophic mistake. So in that moment, that's exactly what I vowed to do. I didn't know how that was going to happen. I didn't know how much time I was going to do in prison, what I could do to that end in prison, but I knew that was my calling.
Mm.
So I expressed this to my family. So they took some solace in knowing that I was handling this catastrophic situation as well as I possibly could, trying to make some sense out of it, trying to bring some purpose to it, right? So it didn't just end in an utter tragedy. So we kind of navigated it that way.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, that's man, I'm telling you, and I was sitting there trying to do the mathematics. We're about the same age. And so it's like the mirrored story. Cause like I said, 5 years later is when I started to, well, actually I take that back. 2005 is when I started to really and true pick up my drinking. Cause I graduated college in 2003 at 23, right before I turned 24. And man, like I'm telling you, it's like I'm looking in the mirror. I'm looking in the mirror in terms of like how life could have been by just that one mistake.
That's right.
And that's what's key, is that, ladies and gentlemen, you guys just don't know when that mistake will be. And that's why it's very important that, if you are drinking, that you utilize those resources in terms of, don't drive. You know what I'm saying? But damn, man, I'm speechless right now because okay, so let's talk about you. Now you're in, you get your sentence, and you're telling yourself, okay, what are the things that I need to do to work on to make sure that a situation like this doesn't happen to the next person? So what was that like?
Absolutely. So I'm sentenced to 17 and a half years, 210 months, day for day.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew going in that if I was going to do anything, it was going to be simply because I needed to do it for myself, to make myself the person that I feel like I'm called to be. It's not to get any time off my sentence or look good for the parole board or anything, because no matter what, I'm doing 210 months day for day. That's the law. It is what it is. So when I get to the prison that I end up at, I knew I had to start with an education. All I had was a GED at the time. I needed to start with an education somewhere. So I applied to be a tutor for the GED program. They hired me. So now I'm in an educational environment. Come to find out, they're offering one community college course at a time for $25 that I could take. Now, I didn't know about a degree plan or, a study plan or a degree focus or anything. I'm thinking in my kind of naive mind, if I just take enough college courses, eventually they'll give me a degree, right? That's how it works. I don't know. So I start to do that. I'm taking whatever I can take, humanities in perspective, writing, 101 and things like that. And then fast forward 3 years, sadly, I lost my father very unexpectedly. That's a whole nother situation where you go to view the casket in shackles and chains and it's a whole nother thing. But I'm able to then take distance education courses from Louisiana State University. He left us some money through, life insurance policies and things like that. His pension, he worked all his life to get. And so now I'm branching out, taking courses from Louisiana State, Indiana University, was able to parlay all of that into an associate's degree in 2010 from Indiana. Then went on to get a bachelor's in sociology from Colorado State University, Pueblo. At this time, I'm taking all psychology and sociology courses, right? And so I'm starting to finally unravel, the tangled web of issues that I had as a youth, and understanding self-concept, and the stages of psychosocial development, and cognitive development, and how substances affect the brain during adolescence and things like that. Discovering a lot about myself, starting to work with the young men around me, because as you can imagine, in prison, there's not a lot of safe spaces in terms of guys you can talk to about vulnerable issues, right? So you had these young guys on the yard that's walking around, lifting weights, puffing the chest out, but then they would see me, and because they saw how I moved in prison, right? I wasn't hanging out with this clique. I wasn't kicking it with these dudes. I'm going to school, I'm tutoring, I'm working with guys on math on the housing unit in my free time. And so I was consistent in that. So they felt comfortable with coming up to me on the yard, talking about some issue with their grandma, talking about some issue with their cellie that they're having, right? They confided in me. So I was able to work with these guys on life issues and mentor them in a sense. I went on to get my master's degree in psychology. And at that point, it's like, okay, now how do I become a certified counselor? Now, I'll tell you, there's no sanctioned program in the Oregon Department of Corrections that says you can get your certification as an Oregon State counselor, right? I happened to got transferred to the one prison where the one program is sad. There's one drug and alcohol program in one medium level prison in the state of Oregon where I could actually go through it as a participant, which I did for 7 months. And then I started to intern there, mentor guys, counsel guys, accrue hours toward state certification as a substance abuse counselor, which I ended up getting in 2019. So about 2.5 years before my release, got state certified. I'm mentoring guys along the way, counseling guys. I began to speak at DUI victim impact panels that they had started to bring within the prison, where victims, those who had lost family members and loved ones to DUI drivers, would come into the prison and they would tell their story with a group of 50 inmates in the chapel. And so they would have one of them, and then one of us from the inside would tell our story about how we, were the offender. And it was such a restorative justice, cathartic, healing dynamic, man. It was spiritual, it was powerful, it was beautiful. And I was a part of that for 4 years before I transferred to the final prison before I would finally release about a year ago.
So and a big salute to you, because wait, hold on. You said you got your master's degree in what year again?
In 2016, I got my master's.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's congrats on both degrees. I received my master's degree in 2018.
All right.
In between, well, 2016 is when I got sobered, and 2018 is when I went ahead and got my master's and stuff.
Absolutely, man.
I salute you and commend you because of the fact that, like, okay, yes, you could have folded and not necessarily had a plan of action while you was in there. You could have been with the riffraff. You could have been in there causing problems, chaos, like some have, and get more time added to your sentence.
Right.
But you got that call. You got that call, and like, okay, look, yes, I made mistakes. You owned up to those mistakes, but it was more or less of what you do now moving forward. And
that's right.
You got the calling in terms of, wanting to tell your story. And not only that, but also help others so that they don't have to be in that situation. You know what I
That's
mean?
right.
So that to me is what, is what it's all about in terms of the rehabilitation aspect of an individual that goes, that goes and does a bid that, okay, look, I'm not just gonna do my time. I'm gonna go in here, I'm gonna try to utilize this time and do better. And you clearly did that. And so now you're at the tail end, or you're getting ready to get out. So what was the plan like for yourself once you did actually, get behind, get released from the walls?
Right. So let me just also say that, I have to put myself into my victim's family shoes and say, had somebody done this to my family, what would I want the outcome to be? Would I just want them to go into prison, do 17 and a half years, get out, go on with the rest of their lives as though this never happened? Or would I want them to carry the message forward and try to prevent other families from having to go through this?
Right.
Obviously, it would be the latter. So that was my drive and my motivation. So I knew getting out that I was going to continue to speak at DUI victim impact panels, number one. I knew that I was going to land a job as a substance abuse counselor, which I have, and I'm very grateful for. And I knew I was going to, continue with this message of not just about the dangers of drinking and driving, which obviously is paramount, but just to really think about the choices that you make and the consequences that can ensue, right? So often we think about, just the positive side of, oh, if I can get away with this, how great it'll be, right? We hardly ever consider the consequences if it doesn't work out, right? And so that's one of the things I want to stress. So I knew getting out, career-wise, I was going to pursue these things, and and just really be an ambassador to what rehabilitation looks like, but what also being an actual positive, constructive member of my community looks like, right? And is trying to make it safer, is getting out the message, to keep us all safer, and to help us all kind of live our best lives, fulfill our potential, look out for one another, do our part.